you have to kill the people who are doing it. You have to make them accountable for their behaviour.
Now, we've been talking about the Red Sea and what is going on there. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has said the UK and US naval forces have successfully repelled the largest Houthi rebel attack in the Red Sea. According to the US military, they shot down 21 drones and missiles overnight, and they added that no damage or injuries had been reported. The Defence Secretary here issued a warning about the attacks continuing.
They have, I'm afraid, failed to heed the warnings issued on the 3rd of January. We seem to see a drop-off after that by a number of different countries, including the UK and the US, for them to stop and to cease this action. But I'm afraid last night proved they really are not listening. If this doesn't stop, then action will be taken. So I'm afraid that I suppose the simplest thing is to say, watch this space.
So that's Grant Shapps speaking earlier. I want to say hello now to Admiral Sir James Burnell-Nugent, who's a former Commander-in-Chief Fleet at the Royal Navy. Welcome to you, Sir James.
John, good evening. Thank you.
Tell me then, if you could, drones and missiles, they continue to be fired at ships in the Red Sea, despite the warnings that have been given. If you were in your old job advising the government, what would be your advice today on what to do?
Well, very good question. Of course, these decisions are, as you say, are indeed political decisions, not to be taken by admirals. But in terms of advice, I'm afraid my advice would be you've got to thump back the people who are firing these missiles.
Yeah.
I do realise that all the arguments about escalation and so on, but this is completely unacceptable behaviour in a global shipping lane. Freedom of the seas is an absolutely fundamental international principle which must be upheld. And the Americans in particular, are slightly less so, have got the capability to attack a launch site within seconds of the launch being made. So the Houthis need to learn that if you launch one of these things, you'll get a bomb down your chimney 10 minutes later.
Yeah, so I mean, the question in my mind then, and you partially answered it, is what form could offensive action against the Houthi militants take? I mean, launch sites, the places, the equipment that releases missiles, it's often very highly mobile, isn't it?
Indeed, what you have to do is very similar to, fun enough, what I was involved in back in the day when we were enforcing the southern no-fly zone in Iraq at the time of Saddam Hussein, where not only were the Iraqi Air Force not allowed to fly, but missile systems weren't allowed to operate. And in fact, if the Iraqis even so much as switched on a radar, they got a bomb straight down the bearing of the radar. And you have to have aircraft, airborne, 24 hours a day, or certainly during the attack windows, to be able to do this. So you have surveillance, you have electronic warfare aircraft and surveillance aircraft, intelligence gathering aircraft, to identify where the firing place is, and then you have a bomb or missile armed aircraft ready to go at a moment's notice.
Right,
The technology, the military technology capability for doing this is readily available and well exercised. It is of course a political decision whether to deploy that capability.
Right. So crucially, Admiral, then no case, no need for boots on the ground, British boots or American boots on the ground in Yemen to go after the Houthi rebels.
I have to say, I think to do this, certainly in as it were the first round. I mean, of course, these things tend to escalate, and I'm not naive about that. But scurrying around in the sand trying to find these people is not a great pastime, as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. In my experience, the way to deal with people who are out of order, particularly in something like an international sea lane, is I'm sorry to say this on an evening when perhaps people are settling down in front of the fire, but you have to kill the people who are doing it. You have to make them accountable for their behaviour.
Right now, I mean more broadly in Yemen, the long-running civil war there seems to be heading towards some kind of ceasefire brokered by Oman, I think, between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. Looked as if it was moving in broadly the right direction. Is there any danger, in your judgment, of that being reignited by what we're seeing now?
I'm afraid so. I think there are dangers, of reignition on all fronts, with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, with the stance that Iran is taking on all these issues with the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas. But politicians have to prioritize and make tough decisions. To choose is to govern, or is it the other way around? To govern is to choose. The protection of sea lanes, the whole world economy, the elimination of poverty, trade, feeding people around the world is absolutely dependent on keeping the sea lanes open.
Yes.
This is a really fundamental point in the not just the prosperity of the world, but the day-to-day life of billions of people. Keeping the sea lanes open is a very, very high priority.
Yeah, and there does seem to be something of a consensus, doesn't there, between strategic experts, of which I do not claim to be one, that no one in the region wants to see, no one on various sides in the region wants to see an escalation into a full-scale regional war. But there is nonetheless a danger of one happening.
There is, of course, there is, and that would be deeply regrettable. But what price freedom? What price freedom of the seas? What price freedom to get food and sustenance for people around the world? It traveled 95% of the world's goods traveled by sea, and it's one of the primary roles of navies, certainly Western navies, to make sure that the sea lanes remain open. And governments have to put these things in. Those who govern have to put these things in priority order, and consider which are the utmost priorities. And in my opinion, I would say this as a sailor, wouldn't I? But in my opinion, keeping the sea lanes open ranks very high on the list of global priorities. And if people get hurt along the way, then the troublemakers need to stop it.